Welcome back to Generation AI. Right now, some data center developers who would like to build in Arizona are getting turned away. Arizona's utilities are telling them they can't serve them because they require so much energy. My colleague Morgan Lowe spoke with APS.
Do you have the electric generation capacity and transmission capacity to serve every data center that wants to come to the valley right now?
So we have made commitments to a certain amount of that energy to serve, but we do not have the energy and transmission infrastructure to support the amount of energy that's being requested of us.
This one particular data center at 40th Street and Loop 202 requires its own electrical substation. And that APS official tells us it's going to take years to meet the electricity demand. We're back with data center blogger Andy Maisley. Andy, I think a lot of people are concerned out there that utilities will build out electrical infrastructure for the data centers and then pass on the costs to the consumers. How legitimate do you think those concerns are?
I think this is very legitimate, much more so than the water issue. I think part of the issue that I've had with the water dialogue on a national level is that I think it's distracting from the much more serious challenge of how AI generates electricity and where it gets electricity from. And there are definitely clear cases that we know of where utilities have, in fact, passed on the costs of new infrastructure that were mainly built to service data centers to consumers. So that aspect of the story is definitely correct. It's concerning, and like every citizen considering stuff like this should definitely be aware of that as one potential downside of data centers moving in. I do worry that the potential tax revenue versus the increase in electricity bills might not be fully appreciated a lot of the time, where there also seem to be a lot of cases where it is both the case that the average person's electricity bill went up, but the county that the data centers were built in just received so much additional tax revenue as well, that in a lot of worlds, I would personally take that trade-off if I were living in that county. Like, if a county is generating something like $100 additional per person in tax revenue that they can use for city services for every, say, like $1 that the average person's energy bill goes up, I would personally be fine if my energy bill went up by $1 a month if it meant that, you know, services got significantly more funded. And so I'm not saying that's an easy question. I think each individual citizen in each individual location should struggle with that for themselves and try to think about what are the trade-offs that I accept here. But I do worry that a lot of times just one side of that story is being presented where people aren't given the opportunity to make the full trade-off on their own, and they just hear that they raise electricity prices without the corresponding benefits.
That's an interesting argument. We know that nationally, energy prices have risen over the past few years. You looked at sort of a national picture in 2025. How much of those rising energy prices are attributable to data centers? Is that the main driver?
At the national level, I'm pretty skeptical that data centers have really budged the average total American energy cost, at least right now. It's partly just because they mainly raise electricity prices by requiring new infrastructure to be built. And this is often a temporary cost, where the new infrastructure is built and there's a lot of cost associated with building it that can sometimes last a very long time if the utility takes out a loan.
You've also written in the past that really it's about inflation has driven up prices since 2020, the war in Ukraine, things like that, that there are these national drivers. But as you noted earlier, there have been regional examples of data centers driving up electricity costs. And I want to bring up one right here on the full screen. Groups like the Natural Resources Defense Council have done analysis, and they've looked at, in particular, like regions in the East Coast, areas around Virginia, where they have a lot of data centers, and they found that it has driven up prices for families. In one 13-state region, the NRDC wrote that by 2028, an average family in that region will end up paying about $70 a month extra on their electricity bills because of forecasted data center growth. $70 is not nothing, Andy. I mean, folks, you know, could potentially feel that if the companies aren't bearing the brunt of these costs themselves.
Yeah, and there are basically two ways to think about this, I think. The first one is I definitely want policy that's designed to make sure that data centers do actually internalize these costs. Like, these are not AI companies are not exactly struggling right now. Like, they're doing very well. And I think that if states impose, you know, specific plans or specific tax policies or utility policies that make sure that data centers aren't passing these on to consumers, or the utilities aren't passing these costs on to consumers as well, I just think that's a win-win for everyone. So on that level, I do think that the average person should probably be advocating more for policies that make sure they do internalize those costs.
And you know who
Utilities
is
also,
advocating for that is President Trump. Take a look at something he wrote last month. He wrote that I never want Americans to pay higher electricity bills because of data centers. We are the hottest country in the world and #1 in AI. Data centers are key to that boom and keeping Americans free and secure, but the big technology companies who build them must pay their own way. And shortly after that post from the president, we had both Microsoft and OpenAI come out with pledges of their own, basically promising to pay their own way when it comes to electricity cost, also ensuring that they restore or recharge more water than they use. What do you think of those announcements?
I think these all make complete sense to me. I'm definitely not super pushy on like, oh, everyone just has to be fine with data centers. I was a little bit skeptical in that opening clip when one of the politicians had said, oh, this is a national security issue. We need to build as many data centers as possible. Like that also, I think people should be pretty wary of. And so I think there's a pretty good middle ground here where data centers can both really benefit specific communities. Like going back to Northern Virginia, like I live a few towns away from Loudoun County where the most data centers in the world are right now. It's also the wealthiest county in the world. And most of the people, most of the tax revenue that the county gets, or at least about like 30 or 40%, seems to come from the data center industry specifically. And so even though people's costs have gone up, my impression is that on net, the average person in that county is way wealthier than they would otherwise be, and their services are just much better run as a result of the data centers being there. And so there are specific policy examples you can look at of a really good relationship between data centers and local governments, but it's not guaranteed. Like there are definitely a lot of cases where, say, the utility has a very strong interest in both building out a lot of new capacity to service these new, very lucrative customers, while also making it very attractive to the data centers by basically passing on the cost to everyday people. So I think people should be very skeptical there. But I do also worry that people can take a very extreme reaction in the other direction and say, oh, these data centers are just stealing all our resources and there's no upside whatsoever. And I don't think that's the case either. I think there are just plenty of cases where there's a really good symbiotic relationship between data centers and local government.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of folks are sort of misinformed about data centers. Policymakers need to step in, but I think you did a great job in this conversation, Andy, of kind of breaking down fact and fiction when it comes to these data centers. You can find Andy Maisley on Substack. He does great writing over there. Andy, thanks so much for being on Generation AI.
Yeah, I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, us too. Hey, we'll be back with another episode of Generation AI next week. We'll see you in the future.